This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the podcast, I have Charles Faulkner. And Charles was originally featured in the New Market Wizards book by Jack Schwager. He has a new book coming out this fall. It's not out yet, called Higher Level Trading, The 5 Stages to Trader and Investor Mastery. As you will see in this free-flowing conversation, Charles and I cover a lot of territory. And he stayed definitely above board, and I think I drifted off into, I'm not really sure where I drifted off into. Maybe I didn't have enough sleep tonight. But anyways, very fun conversation, as you will see.
Hello.
Hey, Charles. How you doing?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Well, I'm in Malaysia, and I'm trying to do all this technology wizardry from 8,000 or so miles away.
Well, don't they build all that stuff over there anyway?
Yeah, but you know what? The bandwidth thing is still an issue. We just don't have that figured out. After all these years, you would think we would have got good bandwidth. I don't necessarily know that it's a Malaysian issue. It's just overall. So,
well, I think it's a human issue that we could speak to if we wanted. That as soon as people had more bandwidth, they went YouTube.
Right. So how you doing? What's going on? I should tell the audience that, I think the first time we met was in 2001. That would be, if my math is correctly, that's more than a few years ago.
Yes.
Wow. Time flies.
Whether we're having fun or not, that's what some people forget sometimes. That relentless sculptor time continues to move on.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to have fun. I don't know if I'm doing it yet. I'm at least I'm in the mix. The mix of something. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm out there mixing it.
I think you certainly leaned opportunities in your direction by doing so.
So what is new and exciting? I know you're in the middle of this book right now. How is it coming? This is for the audience out there that they don't know that you're working on a book called Higher Level Trading: The 5 Stages to Trader and Investor Mastery. And I know that's coming out in the fall, but how does everything stand right now?
I'm very excited by the way I've been able to recast the material, and would love to talk about that today.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to hold off though for 1 second because I want to just let you slowly get into some of the insanity that I might want to take you into a certain direction. But Charles, right now, I'm really curious to your opinion. So you're a man who's got a keen sense of the human psyche, investor psychology, decision making, analyzing people, looking at people, watching behavior. And before we jump into your new title that's coming out, your new book. And perhaps it's going to lead to this. How are you feeling about just human behavior today, decision making? Are you seeing anything today that is different than you've seen throughout your whole career, or is it still just the subject of the human mind, the human being? Is it still the same stuff?
Well, the question itself is misleading, and I don't mean you should not respond to an interviewer that way, but it's that curious effect that in human beings, we are, in a sense, changing the world by not only how we think about it. I'm not somebody that believes you create your own reality, at least not completely, but also the way we act in that world, what we do in that world. And what I was thinking about when we started this call, and you asked me this question, was that a couple things are clearly evident. And one is that the world is getting more complex. There are more people, more interconnectivity, things moving faster, more items, and all of that in number has changed, if you will, the ecosystem to where things that used to be more causal have now slipped into more feedback-oriented systems and have become less understandable to the mental mental hardware and software that we have inherited. For example, simple example would be that if you advertise some band, some musical band, for their off-color lyrics or their terrible attitude or something, to warn people against them, of course, this creates more sales. That is, that things begin having the opposite of the intended effect would be an example of that, although it doesn't have to be opposite. But that kind of thing is happening a lot more. And another thing I've noticed and wondered about is that with all these new devices and with so much information, things are becoming, if you will, more opaque instead of transparent. There's a lot more of the world that's very complicated and completely up and running that we don't know about it. And in the area of trading and so forth, mention things like black pools or what was going on with JP Morgan and their whale trade and things like that. Whole worlds are operating that people aren't aware of. And the way the human psyche responds to that, responds to the invisible and the opaque and the complex, is with magical thinking. And so what I see is that there's actually less critical thinking going on about what's going on, at least in my opinion, than when the world was so-called simpler. Although in one sense it was never simpler, but the human systems of trading or the human systems of commerce were simpler. And now that they're actually more complicated, people can and do have crazier ideas about them.
Well, I have to say, for a pretty bad question, I got a pretty good answer, at least. I felt like I was a freshman in college, and I raised the hand, and the professor just is like, it was like something from Roger Waters in The Wall. Covel, sit down.
Well, not that it was a bad question, but here's the thing: implicit in your question was the idea. Well, is it the same thing that it's always been? And the thing is, well, yes, it is, except that the same thing changes in its relationship to the world as the world changes and as the same thing changes. So, yes, it's the same thing in the markets when there's irrational exuberance as there is when there's utter panic, except, of course, they're entirely different and are motivated by different aspects of our psyche. But fundamentally, yes, it's because it involves us.
No, I had no ego about that at all. I enjoy the whole process of this. You know this. I do. I like being transparent too. But let me ask though. So because we've been talking about you writing this book for a while, and you've got deadlines now, and I know this process. I know what you're going through, but I'm almost hearing it in your voice a little bit right now too, that I imagine the excitement of pen to paper and constructing how you want to put this all down is starting to be quite exciting right now. Why don't you let the audience know how you even came to say, hey, I'm ready to do this work. I'm ready to put pen to paper. I'm ready to lay this all out. How did that process even start?
Well, the truth is, as well as I can tell it, and you'll understand more about that preface later, is I wasn't ready. I had noticed some things in the marketplace, and you and I had talked about them. And you kindly introduced me to one of your editors, and he and I discussed I had three ideas, and of course they and a possible agent liked the one that was least developed, and so I went back and started working on that and thinking more about that, and with horror realized how unprepared I was, but also realized that I could become prepared. I could wrap my head around these ideas and dove into it. And that quality, if I were speaking to your listeners, is that's one of the things that distinguishes the so-called market wizards. It isn't that they already know it, and it isn't that they're even sure that they can know it, but they're sure they can find out. And they're sure that they can do the work. Of that, they're sure about themselves, rather than they're sure they're winners, or rather than they're sure they've got the Midas touch or whatever. And to quote Tom Baldwin's line is, everybody wants the money, but who's willing to do the work? And of course, you know about diving in and doing the work.
Yeah, I mean that is the trick. And I posted something on Facebook a little while, basically said the same thing, which is, are you gonna come up with excuses and rationalize why you can't get past the fear, or are you just gonna jump?
Well, and I think part of that is also to be informed. It's you have the professional athlete, especially the extreme athletes, they aren't just jumping. They're jumping with the knowledge behind them, if you will, that they have prepared themselves. They have done all the work. They have, whether it's learning to do a new trick or learning a new move or ultimately performing in an official game, they have been doing the work all along to be there. And so all that preparation, it's not one insight into, and this goes again to the magical thinking idea. It isn't, I have a secret that will carry me through in my trading in or investing, but rather that it's all the efforts that I've been doing are preparing me for doing this.
Yeah, I should clarify that jumping aspect. I'll give you an example for me. I started doing yoga about a year ago. And so here I now in my early 40s, and I'm doing handstands for the first time in my life. And I mean, at some point in time, there was that kind of, yes, you go through the preparation motions, and yes, you're building up your shoulder strength. But then there's a moment in time where it's like, you got to kick up and you got to do something, and you might fall, but you got to get back up. But there's that moment in time, there's a lot of process that you have to get built up to before you kick up for the first time. But when you kick up, you're still jumping, there is a point in time when you do that first thing, even the extreme guys, you're still jumping.
Oh, yeah. But it's like, is it an informed jumping? Is it a supported jumping? Or is it, and this is something I've been looking at and wondering about how, for example, the trading or the financial industry encourages people to think it's so simple. For example, in one ad, a baby could do it, right? And they're very cute ads, but, the suggestion being that, and then the babies, they're trading, and buying this and doing that. And also gives a sense of activity. So the idea then, and you see the ads on the pages with the, get, so much money to play with, plus this many free trades for the next month or 3 months or whatever it is. And these encourage jumping because it is a leap for people to go into something new. And it's a false sense of preparation in the sense that the kinds of behaviors that system is encouraging, like just jump in, a baby could do this, do not reflect the actual world into which one is jumping. That is that I'm guessing you've had a yoga instructor or two, and you've had lessons, and you have seen this done, the headstand, for example, and other things. And so when you went to do it, it was, yes, you were doing something new you hadn't done before. On the other hand, you'd seen people actually do it, not the rumor of people doing it. You'd prepared your muscle groups under some kind of a supervision or at least occasional check-in to do it. And then you had done it.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Yes.
And I'm encouraging that kind of thinking for traders and investors and there's yet another book out in addition to the Indomitable Trader. There's Pound Foolish and other ones that show that the industry by and large either isn't interested in that because that's not a real revenue stream for them, or actually doesn't want the trader or investor to do that because that also isn't useful in terms of a revenue stream for them. And I know that's damning about the industry, but this is becoming pretty well known, is that work such as yours, and yes, I do give a shout out to it, work in your website and your work of actually getting people at least some of the skills, if not most of the skills they need to do and have mastered to learn to take a proper jump is sorely lacking out there.
You bring up the industry as a whole, and I'll give a little piece of feedback, and I've said this in a couple other podcasts, but traveling around Asia, and I've been speaking on behalf of a brokerage firm, not on behalf of them, but they've been introducing me to clients. I can say whatever I want to say, but most of their clients I've been speaking to are fundamental value-based guys who have restrictions that primarily keep them long only, no leverage, and country-specific assets or securities in their home country. And I'm starting to see more and more that I mean, the fee business is a great business if you can get trillions of dollars of assets and you don't really have to do much. There's not a real incentive for change.
No, and we don't need any kind of evil vampire squid metaphors to explain this. Is that people are self-interested. People want to develop what's good for them, and they notice that our society likes experts.
Well, unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties there. And by the magic of editing, our first part of the interview with Charles was while I was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I am now in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and our conversation continues. So listen, we ended this conversation last time, Charles. We were just starting to get into a conversation about the motivations and the thinking behind a new book that you have coming out. And we'll talk more about it in the fall when it comes out. But you've got a new title coming out called Higher Level Trading, the 5 Stages to Trader and Investor Mastery. And I know it's your first official trading book per se, but maybe you could let the audience know some of what went into your thinking, how this project has even come to be.
Yeah, I was graciously introduced to your editor by yourself. And he said, well, what do you got? And I started out with an idea concerning personal development. And he went, yeah, pass on that. And I went, well, I have a idea in terms of explaining behavioral finance, behavioral economics, which of course there are a number of popular and both well-written and well-received books by professors in that field. And he went, yeah, there's enough of those. And then I said, well, the thing is, if you roll those together, you end up in this position where actually it's that people have to develop through stages of thinking and interacting both with their personal lives and in their trading lives, that it makes sense of why most people don't make it. Most people don't get to become anybody that anybody's heard about because it's work and it takes a certain kind of effort and a certain kind of development. And he went, well, I'm interested in that one. And I went, well, that one I'm still thinking about. And so I went ahead and continued to think about it and put my notes and research and contacts and all that together to make sense of what is the developmental path that succeeds.
Well, let me ask you, because you were a little generic there, and there's a book that I love from many years ago by a woman named Brenda Ullin, and she wrote it, I think, in the early 20th century, and it was called If You Want to Write. And the way she wrote it, you could basically remove the word writing and insert anything that you might want to do, and it would work. So I'm curious, if you were a little generic there at the beginning, does this title, well, I know it's specifically aimed at investing, trading, does it have a crossover appeal for any type of success somebody might want to pursue?
I think it does. And in my own thinking, that this is a specific application of what I know at this point. I'm not the only person that might know something, but I think I may have found out a few things. And so I'm putting that forth.
Well, I'm not going to let you get away with being that short and sweet. That's not going to work. Well, listen, so you've been, for the audience that might have not known or had forgot, you were in the book, The New Market Wizards, and Jack Schwager profiled you. So, and that was a while ago. So you've had a chance to really observe and be around a lot of very bright and successful traders over the years. So what now beyond, I mean, look, I can take credit for an introduction to Jim Boyd, but that's about it because I know nothing of the content. I haven't seen the book. So get into some of the more, what was really spurring you? I mean, this is something different. I mean, you know full well when you start to put pen to paper and you're saying, hey, I'm going to put 80,000 words out in a book, it becomes a whole different beast.
It is a different beast. And it shouldn't surprise. This is what I was just writing to a colleague who lives in Paris yesterday. And it shouldn't surprise people that it's complicated, because life is complicated. Yet it's deeply in our nature that we want things to be simple. And this fulcrum, if you will, this kind of, walking that line, that tightrope, if you will, is very curious, because our minds want to think, it's really easy to become a trader. I read Michael's book on trend following and I just follow it, and in fact, if they could, it would work. And yet, as some more famous comic than myself would say, and then life intercedes, then life comes into it. And the life part of it is also well known in trading, but people act like it isn't, which is that how to make money and things to do that work are pretty straightforward. I mean, depending on the time frame, depending on your capital, depending on your goals, yes, they're quite different, but they're pretty straightforward. But what is it people don't do? They don't follow them. And so, okay, well, they don't follow them. So what? Well, how is it that people are so dedicated to whatever it is, and then they don't follow it? They don't do it. And this, of course, has created entire fields, the most recent of which is called behavioral economics, which is giving us example after example after example of how we're not rational decision makers. We're not thoughtful, careful individuals, that we like to think whatever we do is best, that we like to think that we're better drivers and better lovers and better decision makers than anybody else. And, that if we get an idea or insight, it must be true and all this. Well, what's going on here? And how is it, though, that there are people who actually do? They do it. And the conclusion I came to is a conclusion that's emerging in neurosciences and developmental sciences and so forth. Not that surprising, but so hard for us to absorb, which is that there are people thinking on different levels, that we're not all, it's not a difference of how much information, it's a qualitative difference in terms of how people are envisioning and thinking about what they're doing. And like any form of expertise, any form of achievement, it takes time to develop it. As I say, it's so odd that on the one hand, it's so obvious and simple, yet it's so hard for people to take it on board. As I said, I was joking with my colleague that, we're not surprised that, it's tough to become an honor student or an athlete, a world-class athlete, or even an exotic dancer. I mean, every one of these things takes efforts. And yet when you get to this straight...
We might have to explore that exotic dancing part again. Continue.
It takes a certain natural gift, gifts, if you will. It takes, a certain kind of mindset. And then it takes dedication. And I'm joking, but I'm not joking, because all sorts of things in life take that. And yet, because of our brains, because of our society, because of our need to be right, we somehow didn't think that trading and investing would take that. And of course it does. And it's like there is a path. It is hard work. And it is something that can, at least in its workman fashion, be achieved by many people. But not if you continue to think of it as this kind of magical, well, I met a guy, or I had a flash in the middle of the night, or, all the other things that people do instead of doing the work.
As you bring this idea up of the qualitative differences, and I'll give you an example that you can run with and play with. And so I caught on Ed Sekoda's Trading Tribe recently. He made a comment about day trading. And he said that traders use it medicinally as distraction from deeper issues. And I took that statement and I put it into a podcast, and I simply made the challenge. I said, the root of my books, the only reason I've had any success is I was lucky enough to see all these insane track records going back decades, all audited and on file with the CFTC for all these trend following traders. And that was the foundation for my work. If I didn't have those, then it's just my opinion. And so I took the idea of where are the day trading track records? I know we can always find one or two guys here or there, whatever. And so I thought about Ed's comment, and to take it a step further, what I was really thinking about was the feedback that I got, I mean, oh, you would have thought that I had just, injured somebody. And instead of even being direct about it or confronting the idea of no track record or confronting what Ed said about using it as a distraction, they would say like, well, your interview style's not very good. You're not very prepared. All these other things. And they just didn't like the idea that somebody was making them think about something and really challenging them on it. Like, once again, starting with Ed's comment, and they just want to fight on that. And all I was saying was, hey, hold on, just do yourself a favor and just find the proof before you latch onto it and assume it's something you can do.
Well, and this, again, the behavioral finance people and researchers in human cognition, they've begun to discover this. There's an effect that goes like this, is the less you know about something, the more convinced you're right about what you know.
That's a great statement. Say it again. That was great.
The less you know about something, because it allows your brain to make really clear and vivid pictures, the more convinced, because of those clear, vivid pictures seeming true, the more you think it's true. So,
I love that.
It's a deep fallacy in human thinking to begin with, that we like simple things, which of course turn out not to be true because life is messy. I mean, to put it in the simplest of terms.
The less you know, the more dangerous you are.
Yeah, there's a corollary to that. It's not quite the less you know, the more dangerous you are. No, if you know a little bit, then you're tremendously dangerous because you think you know something. So the research is in, and people who want to look it up can find it, that traders, investors who have researched a little bit into the markets, who actually are somewhat self-educated, and I mean, have taken it seriously and done, read a few books and websites and been diligent, but are only a little bit or partway there, they become convinced that they know something, and then they're even more dangerous to themselves.
I'll add that as an interesting example in my conversation with Jerry Parker the other day, who was one of Richard Dennis's Turtle students, who's had a fantastic hedge fund career. And he led off the beginning of the conversation by saying that he is trend following plus nothing. So it was just like, the brilliance there is that he knows exactly what he knows. And he knows it well, and he sticks to his guns, and he doesn't try to be something that he's not.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful example because that's really hard for us to do. I mean, as I was saying earlier, and again, anyone can easily find the research on this about how we're optimistic, we think we're better drivers, and we're better lovers, and we're better investors, and all this and the other. Well, in terms of evolution, as a species, that makes perfect sense. It does. Everyone thinks it's gonna happen for them. So of course they do something instead of nothing, which is, motivating and action oriented. And then the ones who do badly, are culled from the herd. And the ones who succeeded, whether they succeeded by luck or skill, are left. So it is, over time, it's a strategy that works for the species. But on the individual level, it's delusional. On the species level, it's survival oriented. So you years ago, you got me an introduction to our friend in New York, Larry Haidt, who said if you could take the shoulda, coulda, and woulda out of your thinking, you'd actually see something other people don't, and you would have an advantage. Well, all of this neuroscience research into human biases and heuristics, as they're technically known, it's all about that. It's all about the coulda, shoulda, woulda, and all of that is like the very rose-colored glasses that influence our decision-making. And for the few people that can, take them off. And what my work is about is to say it's not biological, although I think people can get a head start. I mean, there are biological differences. We know, people taller athletes more likely to go into basketball, or wide guys going into football and so forth. So there's a starting, advantage, if you will. There, Ed Sakota, Larry Height, so forth. They may have had some sort of mental makeup that allowed them to think a little more in that direction. But when you get beyond that, a lot of it is you got to do the work. And that the work is not so much learning another trading system. It's not so much, trying to find the secret sauce or something, or being able to do, Fourier equations. The work is being able to question your own assumptions. The work is being able to move beyond the conventional thinking that's all around you. And it is work.
Finding out a way to think. I've learned that from you. I've seen that from Ed, and it's observing how someone puts words together, observing how somebody constructs sentences, and then you realize, wow, they do that a little bit better than I do. And why are they doing it that way? And what can I learn from that? And then seeing, why do they put the sentence together like that? Oh, I see what they're doing. And I think it's that curious nature one has to have.
Well, that's why I say that there can be some biological advantage to someone who is more innately curious than the other guy. Mm. But that's just the starting line. After that, How do you apply that? And do you understand that it's never done? That, you keep going and developing and developing. And this is where, this is their books, the latest one by Robert Greene last year called Mastery. A very nice title, where you find that it is just in our nature. It is so easy to get at one trick, and go, okay, I know how to use auto-tune, so I don't need to sing or develop myself anymore. I'm done with that. Or, I found this one thing in the markets, I'm going to run with that. In contrast to somebody goes, okay, I found that one thing. What else? And what else? And here's your Parker you were just talking about. And in the face of all that, if you do all the what else's and you find out that the one thing is the thing still with you, okay, I'll do that. It's seeing, as Larry Height was saying, it's seeing things as they are. And in fact, that is one of the toughest things for us humans to do.
Hey, by the way, I had Robert Greene on my podcast last year for that book.
Very cool. And I recommend people go and listen to it because
he's a good guy.
Guy takes the time to know his stuff.
Yeah. So I got an example for you. Let me kind of piece this together, and I want your analysis where somebody that thinks like this, where they are in the stage, and I want you to maybe describe it. So I often have people write me, and they're all worried about their initial trading signal. And they'll say, well, the breakout happened in January and the market's still going up today. What do I do? Do I wait for a retracement? So that's a kind of common refrain. And to kind of an adjunct to that, the other night, I ended up, don't ask how exactly, but I ended up at a room full of would-be Vietnamese entrepreneurs, like 50, 60 folks, and having a 3-hour conversation, kind of leading it. And at the end, I had been using some notes from Seth Godin on one thing. And Seth Godin always has this issue of like, look, you're never going to have the perfect product. You just have to ship at some point in time, because when you ship, you will get feedback, you will fail, you will learn, you will improve. And this guy stood up and he said, well, I can't just ship. It's got to be perfect. What if it's not perfect? And I said, well, gosh, how many versions of the iPhone has there been? What did the first Macintosh look like? And so I connect that with the idea of missing the breakout and waiting while the market goes straight up. So if you hear that description of the person that's looking for the perfection, what do you think when you hear that description?
I think of somebody who's trying to predict the future. And this is part of my work, what I've been involved in these last couple of years, I'm going to back up a moment and go sideways, but it'll make sense. There is a movement afoot in physics, which has been motivated by biology, to stop trying to make the models so elegant. Because there's been this idea that it underlines all of physics, which is that an elegant model, a beautiful model, will be more the true model. And when they finally, due to all of the variation in biology, if you know the stories, and Darwin, and he and his fellows had figured out there were like 40,000 kinds of beetles. And their remark was, well, God must have loved beetles. He'd made so many different kinds of them. There was only a few kinds of humans, but there were lots of kinds of beetles. And that goes back to that seeing things as they are. And to see things as they are is to give up this really beautiful and pristine and wonderful image in the mind of how things might be, and that perfection that people put in the future. That perfection is a natural tendency in our brain, and yet it can be, as you were just noting with the entrepreneurs where you were, it can be, the stone that stumbles you completely, that people go, well, I'm waiting for that perfection, whereas the world is full of variation. And our brains can't take that in, so we look and we see a beetle and we go, oh, it's a beetle. And I'm using that as a dumb example, but you could also look, it's a breakout. You could use an example like it's a momentum trade. Use an example like it's a commodity trade, whatever. People use those same kinds of categories to perfect in their mind what they think is true about the world, but it's not the world. Meanwhile, the world goes on.
Yeah, I was thinking about Stephen Jay Gould's book, Full House, and the whole idea of variation. And there's just so much variation out there that if you allow yourself to get caught up in it, you might not ever get anything accomplished. I mean, you really just have to imagine it. It's just one crazy, chaotic stew of, as I said in Vietnam, I just had a huge dish of pho tonight. And that's all it is. That's the world, is one big dish of pho. So
you go back to your trader. Well, what's the guy to do? And here's where I do have a solution, is that people think the solution is, let's start where they go. People typically think, well, if I get more information, or if I find the perfect system or something like that, that will resolve, it will solve, it'll dissolve my problem. And while it's contrary to their thinking, their experience in the meantime is getting more examples and more variation and being able to get a larger sense of what's going on. And that's where to put the effort. We talked about this the last time we had a conversation about the fellow who was looking at the price charts for years and years as a young trader. Not that he was trying to find the perfect trade, but he may have been trying to find the perfect trade. But that practice of seeing the same or other kinds of behavior in the markets over years and years and many, many, many kinds of markets built up, if you will, a database, a foundation, like having seen tens of thousands of chess games where he could then be able to see patterns that other people couldn't see. And that's where I can say there is no substitute for experience. And people don't want to hear that. They want a technique. They want a quick leg up. I talk about this in my book. They want to know a guy who's going to give them the secret sauce, And the thing is, even if the guy has the secret sauce, it's not yours. You don't have the experience yet to actually know what that is and how it applies and when it doesn't apply, and so forth. And that comes from being deeply involved with what it is you want to be involved with, in this case, trading.
Yeah, I was just smiling to myself when you said the guy. I was thinking of it was almost a description straight out of every Scorsese film. There's always the guy, and he's usually played by De Niro. But how did you, getting back to the book, so if we were to lay the foundation, and we're going to talk again in the fall when it comes out, and I won't, quote, give away the secret sauce just yet, but if we were to lay the foundation, was there a moment, is there something that crystallized for you that was kind of the launch of this title, this particular book, or was it just a combination of many, many factors that you've been looking at in research over the years? Because I could think back with some of my books, there was something that crystallized. It was almost like one thing. I almost could imagine each book came from one experience, and then it just all branched from there. Did you have something similar happen in your world?
No. It emerged out of watching and listening and being around people, being around different traders, being around actual market wizards, that it just became over time, not immediately, over time, more and more obvious that these people were not living in the same world as me. That was my initial thinking. But I went, well, but of course they're living in the same world I am. Well, they're not seeing it the same way. Well, that's not getting at it either. And by step, I got to the point where I began to think they're conceiving of it differently. To put it in a vernacular metaphor, they're slicing and dicing it differently than me. And it feels natural to them what they're doing, and it feels natural to me what I'm doing. And we can have kind of a conversation when we talk, but they're in a different world than me. And when that idea began to sink in is when this idea of these levels began to become not just a conceptualization, but real for me. And I went, okay, well, what are the ways people do this? And of course, I started out with the idea, well, everybody's different. Everybody's got their own take on things, which is true. Yet it also, after a while, began to emerge that there were, in fact, very detectable levels, if you will, conceptualizations widely held. And I'm not saying any of the thing is people immediately go, well, I want to be the top one. I spent an evening at the top of the Hancock building with some of the winners of a trading game, or if you will, contest that happens each year. And the winners all came to Chicago, and we were around a table, and, the bright lights of the city in one direction and the Great Lake in the other. And they were all going, okay, what level am I? And I began to explain the levels. And someone, I'm a level 3. How can I be successful when there are 5 levels and I'm just a 3? And I'm a 4, and they joust each other, but what came out of it was, how well can you utilize what you know? This is where your work is a huge example, is trend following. And excuse me for saying this about a number of very thoughtful and important books. Trend following is pretty straightforward.
But it's extremely straightforward.
But the actual doing of it, and again, this is what I started out with, that slippage between, okay, here's something very straightforward to do that'll make you money. Now, can you get yourself to do it? Not so straightforward.
Well, what's funny, though? When you say it's straightforward, I think conceptually, if you read some of the titles I put out and you look at the words in print, it's very straightforward and objective. I think the hard part, though, that I've seen over the years is for people to imagine that they are going to trade off the movement of the price of the market, and that's it alone. One of the things that I've been doing in Asia is I've had a chance to make, 23 presentations across Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia in front of sovereign wealth funds, hedge fund managers, mutual fund managers, the vast majority of which are value guys, all the nice education from the Ivies and all that stuff. And they just listen and they hear this idea of following price movement and this momentum thinking, and these are the bright guys. These are the ones with all the experience, and they just don't wrap their arms around it. So I agree with you. Conceptually, it's very easy, but for a lot of people, there's this huge blind spot with using price as a decision-making cue.
Well, and this goes to the point of my work. And this is something, again, you were asking me earlier, did it come to me in a flash? And if there was a flash much earlier in life, my flash was, how do people know what to want? Mm-hmm. Now, that might seem really obvious because people go, well, I know what I want. I'm going, no, not what you want. How do you know to want that? And out of that came a whole body of work that people can still find that I did on metaphor. That is, if you think life is a game, then you want to be a winner and not a loser. You'll work on your strategy and so forth. If you think life is a journey, you'll be sure you've got the right equipment, and you'll have maps and how to get there. And if you think, life is a book, what chapter are we on, and so forth. And where the research has caught up with, not my insight, but the people I drew on, is that these turn out to be much more real than people thought. Now, what's an example for your listeners? Efficient market theory. That this idea, like life is a journey, or that like life is, that trading is a game, or whatever that is, that efficient market theory is that humans are rational decision makers. Again, a fiction like the other ideas, but a fiction that influenced what people pay attention to, what they value, what they notice, what they respond to, what they get advanced degrees in, and what they go out and do for a living. So you're talking to these sovereign wealth funds and these individuals, very bright people, I'm sure, in this different area, and they are operating out of a mindset that is causing them to notice things about the world. The world is complex because they had to get an advanced degree to do this. The world is made up of these rational and irrational components, so they have to be able to quantify them in some way and qualify them and so forth. And these very elaborate ways of thinking develop, which feel true to the people, which go, well, I've spent years studying this. I have an advanced degree in this. And then you come in and say, what if you looked at it this way? And the way that you want to propose is certainly no more challenging than the ways they're already doing, except it isn't supported by all these other ideas and images and metaphors and so forth that they already have in place and they already can't not help but use. Now we're deep in the middle of my book and my work. Is a few people can notice that they've done that and then move on. This is what one author called the lattice theory when he was trying to figure out what Charlie Munger, who Warren Buffett's junior partner, was doing. And Munger says, I have like 100 models, he calls them. He's like, I have 100 models. And the thing is to draw on the model that you need in the situation when you need it, which is to say that Munger could step back from his thinking and go, okay, does this way of thinking about this work here or not? That's a big step. That's a step up. That's a higher level trading ability to be able to step back and go, okay, when would I use momentum? And when would I use trend following? And just that idea right there means that people could begin to evaluate different methodologies as ways of seeing the world, not as trading strategies. And if that sounds a little exotic, well, that's actually the mental world most people live in and don't realize. These are real until they're real until you develop enough to go, oh, wait, that's just a way of thinking. I could do it differently.
To give an example of the rarity of perhaps having this mental dexterity to adjust and be flexible. So I make all these presentations. Usually it was a large group in a room, maybe 3 or 4 people. So it was a lot of people over 23 presentations. And I did this in 8 days, about 75 minutes for each presentation. But the very last presentation I did in Singapore was with a family office, basically one guy who happened to be an extremely wealthy, net worth somewhere close to $3 billion, Kiwi. And they were the only people that wanted to have a follow-up conversation. And because when I was telling him, I was like, well, it's interesting. I've talked to all these value guys and they just don't know how they can do it. And he's like, well, we basically have one client here and we go for absolute returns. And so it was like they just wanted to hear. They heard something different. They saw some viability to it, and they're like, "Oh, we can take this in. We can absorb this. We know what to do with new information that might help us to do well." They didn't worry about whether or not they had made their money in some other way. They were going to take this in and use it in some way. And so it was at least nice to have that one experience of getting through to perhaps the most successful person that I met in that whole 8-day event.
Yeah, that's and for your listeners, that's it's an outlier. Are you the outlier? And the chances are you're not. But here's the very interesting thing, and this is why I'm bothering to write the book, to do the work, to talk to you, and so forth. It is possible at every moment to become that outlier, because it's a change of thinking. It doesn't require $3 billion. It doesn't require, inside market information. If you can make the change of thinking from you are a certain kind of skillful person to you do a certain kind of skillful thing, for example, that's one way to think about the change. And that you could add other skills to what you do. If you can make that shift, which many people can't find themselves able to do, you can become that outlier. You can become that person who now has an edge because you can see more of what's actually there than what you think coulda, woulda, shoulda been there.
Yeah. It's some really powerful thinking. I wanted to add something. I want to see where you wanted to go with this too. You were talking about the idea of efficient markets, and I'm going to let you run with that a little bit more, because even people that maybe have heard that might need a better explanation. And I know you can give one to really explain the idea of efficient markets and inefficient markets. One example I want to give you that I saw the other day, I was watching a presentation. It was an interview with Vernon Smith, who won the Nobel Prize the same year that Kahneman won it for experimental economics. And so Smith, who was kind enough to appear in my film that you were kind enough to appear in as well, but Smith made the comment, he was talking about the housing bubble, and he basically said, we learned this stuff in the laboratory years ago, and this is the reason he got his Nobel Prize. He goes, we, basically created these artificial markets in the laboratory with students, and we started putting these markets together, and all of a sudden we didn't really expect it, but we started having bubbles would get created, and they had no explanation for where they were coming from. They couldn't predict them, but they would just appear. And so the bottom line is that Vernon Smith really got his Nobel Prize for basically proving that all of this econ that had come about the efficient markets really just was inaccurate. I mean, I'll let you run with that and maybe let you explain to the audience a little bit more about the idea of efficient versus inefficient.
Well, but this goes back to where sideways a while back, and I said I'm going to talk about physics a moment, because there was a point in the development of physics where a really elegant theory, gravitation, just a few equations, electricity. I mean, Maxwell's 4 equations that explain electromagnetic theory. I mean, the brain is just like, oh my God, there it is, And as Einstein said, it's like, I want to know God's thoughts. And they assumed, it's a human tendency of this elegance, this being able to see deeply into the world. And at a certain level, if you will, at a certain resolution, with a certain kind of instrument, it all does have that orderliness to it. And with human beings, that orderliness in economics is about 30,000 feet, maybe 25,000 feet, which is to say, if you pull back and you see human beings not as individually motivated, that you want to go to one restaurant and your friend wants to go to another, and so forth. You pull back enough that you're like little dots moving around, and you go to restaurants and you go to clothing stores and you get on airplanes and you're in hotels, Skyping and so forth. Then at that point, you can begin to describe some kind of physics of human interaction. But of course, when you've pulled back that far that humans are just dots, you can't take in the individual into account. So you tell a story about it and you go, well, each one is trying to maximize their utility, which is to say well-being, goodness, whatever. We could have used goodness, but they came with utility. And in that, you were able to see things in a way and derive some equations that in fact had this insight into masses of people. And that was if you will, the framework that resulted in the efficient market theory. And it does have insights, and it also has seductions. One of the big seductions is it is so orderly. It has numbers. it has equations, and you go, well, it must be true. And so our brain, as I remember I said earlier, who wants the simple story with the really clean lines, and the less you know, the more you believe it, also came into play with this story. So you have Fama, who's famous, actually is one of the principal authors of efficient market theory, coming up with these elaborate explanations of why there are bubbles. It's entirely rational, of course, but it's explanations after the fact, or what we call in everyday life excuses.
Yeah, and the idea of predicting is just that's where the problem starts for so many people, and you discussed that in the beginning of this podcast. Well,
and the thing is, it's in our nature to want to predict. And again, taking this idea of, whether it's 5 feet or 25,000 feet, at 5 feet, we're trying to predict what's going to happen next. Is this person friendly? Am I going to eat today? And so on and so on. And we have a whole history as a species of predicting the next moment. And at that level, it works pretty well. Someone looks at you and smiles. You go, oh, they're friendly. They look at you with another look. You go, oh, I better back up. So we instantly, this is the system one idea, we instantly derive assumptions that obviously have worked because we're still here. In fact, we're the most successful species in history. Yay for our team. And as one pulls back to 25,000 feet, the brain still is using those patterns. So now we have, whether it was in history like Hegel and philosophy, predicting the movements of history, or whether it's one of those Washington think tanks, which, tells you what Iran is definitely going to do next year and charges huge amounts of money to find out that secret. It's the same pattern.
Yeah, look at North Korea right now. I mean, I'm sitting over in Asia right now and just reading some of the international news, and it's like this kind of cherubic kind of dopey looking kid basically has got the entire world transfixed as to whether or not he's going to launch a scud off into outer space that may or may not hit something. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how much everyone is trying to figure out whether or not he's going to send one missile off into Looney Tunes land.
Yes, exactly. And why is that? Again, this comes back to my work in the sense that it's not about thoughtful international analysis. It's not about careful military intelligence and spying on their technology. It's not about understanding the deep psychological motivations he might have. No, it's about the fact that humans are really distracted by vivid imagery. And the idea of this missile flying into the sky with a fire coming out of the other end and then landing somewhere with a tremendous boom, that image is so big and so compelling to people. As you say, it's one missile. Transfixes most of these brilliant brains. And you're right, there's, hundreds of thousands of brilliant brains in the State Department and in the military and in private industry and so forth are all transfixed on this very simple, vivid image that they can't get out of their head. And going back to the point of why you would ask me to speak with you is the person who can look at that and go, it's just one image, who can step back mentally and say, I am not my thought processes. I have certain thought processes. And this is not the only technique, but it's the one I'll emphasize today. Someone who can do that and begin to put out in their brain multiple scenarios, which, by the way, is almost the definition of being an advanced thinker, is you can, instead of like Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner, along with Smith, who said that what you see is all there is. This is one of his insights he brings forth in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Most people, most of the time, is what they see in their mind is all they think there is, and they can't not respond to that. And the person who can hold 2 or 3 thoughts in their head, like you were just doing, this is a Looney Tunes, situation. It's one missile. The U.S. could easily deal with it, as could most of the countries in the area, and so on and so on. Suddenly, you've got room to think about things. And suddenly you're not the guy who dedicated years and years and years to being the value investor or the momentum investor or whatever. You go, okay, how does this work and when does it apply? And now you've got a chance.
I mean, let me take this missile example a little bit step further and let you run with it. So my thinking would be, if I was in this world, I'd say, okay, look, this is not a great situation because let's say he can launch a missile that has a 2,500 kilometer range, and let's say he puts a nuke on top, and let's say he makes a miscalculation, and let's say it hits Tokyo. Nobody wants that to happen. However, you have to start to look at it from a standpoint of odds and say, what are the odds? And then you say, what's the response? And I think what's interesting about what's going on in the media, as opposed to reducing this to a discussion of odds, it's almost like the media is gearing this up where it's almost like a kind of a sadistic, like, let's watch the car accident. It's almost like people want something bad to happen because they're bored.
Well, in honor of the fact that we're in the middle of April, I'll say that it's been my back of the mind thought for some time that we're hoping that something disastrous will happen or the aliens will come so we don't have to file our income taxes. So here's the thing. If I was to put it in a word or a few words, is that in order to tie things together in our minds, to keep track of them, to do what we do as humans, outside of the moment when we're eating or drinking or doing something else, we tell stories. We tell stories to tie things together, and to do that, we use vivid imagery because we respond to that. So our news media is an expression of that. We'd like to think it's news and it's serious and it's helping us make decisions. No, its fundamental purpose is to appeal to the part of us that loves stories. Of course, the other part is they want to make profit. So they're going to tell the most vivid and the most emotionally exciting, even if it's fear, stories they possibly can. So as you and I've talked on other occasions, there's any number of very smart guys, the market wizards say, you got to unplug your television. You have to control the flow of information to yourself because those inputs do not exist to inform you. They exist to make a profit for themselves. Now, not a bad thing. I'm not against that, but I am saying, therefore, they are going to try and excite you and put up the most vivid stories they can, rather than the messy mishigas that is human life.
Here's a way, and this kind of builds on something you said earlier when you were talking about some of the market wizards and how they kind of operate on a different plane. And a lot of people are fond of always saying, that thing that Ed Seykota learned 30 years ago, that's not relevant today. Well, clearly they'd be mistaken, but I see the brilliance in someone like what Ed does is he says, okay, we've got all these sources of information flowing at us, right? So I can either be the guy that decides I'm going to try and take in more information each day. If I go to Drudge Report every day, if I go to Zero Hedge every day, if I have Bloomberg on in the background and CNBC on the background, if I get more and more and more and more and more stimulation, I will make better decisions. Or I would say somebody like Ed looked at it and said, let's operate at a higher plane here. The information flow is never going to stop. It's going to get more intense. Where is a better place to make decisions? And clearly somebody like Ed Seykota and Richard Dennis and the Turtles and other trend following traders, David Harding, they said less is more. Less information, and we can make better decisions and then ignore the distractions. And I was just thinking as you're talking and the whole idea of how some of these guys operate at a different plane.
Well, yeah, that is, and there is where I didn't want to. And I didn't want to take up the idea that people operate on different levels. It's anti-democratic. It suggests certain things about, well, I know better than you. But in fact, I ultimately had to take out the woulda, coulda, shoulda and say, this is what is that getting to the point where you ask this question, at least among traders, what do I need to know in order to make my trading decisions? Some people are listening going, well, I don't know what I need to know. And I go, exactly. these guys have gotten to a point where they've gone, okay, I know what I need to know to make the decision, and anything else is a distraction. So I'm actually going to reduce my inputs to the inputs I know make a difference, because I've taken the time to vet my inputs to find out which ones are important and which ones aren't. Well, there's the work. I mean, this is where people say, well, Charles, there's a lot of words you're saying. What can I do? And I said, well, this is the thing. At each stage of the trading process, the people who get good at this, they do the work. And part of the work would be what inputs make a difference, what inputs don't. And they're going, well, how would I figure that out? Somebody says. I said, well, that's the first thing you need to figure out. And in your trend following process, to give a real example, you point out, the only input is price, or price over time, if they want to get, fancy about it. And so then how do I utilize that input and that input alone? And then how do I study that input to find out how that could be useful? Well, there's work there. And you're feeling free to restrict yourself. And in a sense, if you'll allow me the analogy, this is, like the athlete who, the basketball player who goes and does dribbles every day and does, shots every day. And you got to go do the practice to actually find that out. Now, in your case, you've done a lot of the legwork for people in the sense that you can show them all the data you've already gathered on this. Back before that happened, people like Ed had done the research and they were keeping it to themselves, about how this worked. and therein, I can say that your listeners are in a better position than traders, investors, speculators of even a generation ago, because a lot of the legwork's been done. But the really important thing to do still has to be done by every individual, him or herself, which is that you've got to be able to go in and get the experience and then be able to say, okay, this is one example. What would be another? What would be another? How do these compare? How do I evaluate them? What am I using to evaluate them? I know this sounds boring, but this is the going in and beginning to do that kind of sorting out of all of these opportunities instead of jumping from one trading system to another, or one guru to another, or one advisor to another, until your money's gone.
Yeah, but as you say this, Charles, and this is, it's going to come off as a compliment, but I think you're going to see where I'm going with this, is that when I have listened to you over the years, when I've listened to Ed Sakut over the years, or Richard Dennis, or a lot of other well thought out folks in these subjects, people might not understand that most of the words that come from certain types of people that think through things, they're not extraneous words. Meaning if someone really sits back and kind of analyzes what you've said over the course of this podcast today, it wasn't extraneous stuff that you wanted to say because you liked the way your voice sounded. And I think that's a real interesting thing that's hard for sometimes for people to grasp, is what's important in what Charles Faulkner is saying, and what's important in what somebody else might be saying. Now, somebody can come back and they can say, okay, Covel, you're redundant. But that's different than being extraneous. You know what I mean?
Well, and I would go on to say, and you're redundant because most people can't hear it the first time, not because they don't have ears, but because of their preconceived notions, their ideas of how things should be or could be, and they don't get it. Like you said, you did all these presentations in Southeast Asia. I'm sure had some wonderful times as well. And you had a few people went, let's talk a little more about this. Most of them went, yeah, and went on to the next thing. And this is the unfortunate fact in my work, is I've had to conclude that but again, and I'm interrupting myself here, very few people become professional athletes or chess masters or even exotic dancers. It's a lot of people drop out for whatever reason along the way. And your listeners would do well to, as much as they can, let go of their ideas of their own brilliance and the fact that they're better drivers and lovers and traders and all the rest, and get a sense of what it is they're willing to do. Because ultimately I have good news, which is that if you're willing to acknowledge what level you're at and what efforts you're willing to make, you can probably find a strategy that'll work. Now, it may be at the lower levels, investing in passive index funds, distributed over a number of countries and so forth. And this is a well-known strategy. You can find it in, most, big brokerage houses' websites. And that may actually be the best thing for that person to do at that level. And if you're willing to do the work to go on to learn to think for yourself and to develop your own strategies and to think them through and to find out, as I was talking earlier, sorting out all the different approaches and what works when and when it doesn't and so forth, then you may have a trader in you. And your work in trend following is definitely one they should look at. Not the only one, but definitely one they should look at. And a few, just like in professional athletes and chess masters and everything else, a few will have a natural gift and will take it forward and do something tremendous. And God bless. I mean, I will love to meet you someday. But that's most of us are somewhere in the middle. We're not the tallest, we're not the most handsome, we're not the smartest, but we do have what it takes if we figure out what it is we really want to do and we're willing to do it.
So I have one last final question. So based on everything you've said today, and I'm sure the audience is out there, they're thinking the same thing that I'm thinking of. I think we're up to 3 times that you've mentioned exotic dancers in this conversation.
It provokes an image. I'm doing it on purpose. I'm showing that is how your brain works. You can't help doing this. Now, for some people, it might be dancer. For some people, it might be value. For some people, it might be momentum. For some people, it might be breakout. And the point is, those are all things with shiny, what do they call that stuff on the costumes, the tinsel and the rest. And it's only one option. There are others. And to get beyond that in one's brain, to allow oneself to go, ooh, shiny, which, by the way, every mammal on the planet is attracted to shiny. Rats will take shiny stuff back to their nests. It's part of our biological makeup. And a few of us humans can go, ooh, shiny. Okay, now what's important? So thank you for the question.
Do you want to hear a PG related rejoinder on this subject?
Go ahead.
So I have an assistant named Michelle, who you met a few years ago in Chicago. Michelle is a sweet girl, and she is a goody two shoes is the best way I can describe her. Married goody two shoes. And so she knew that I liked this author, Seth Godin, and she heard about another book, and she picked up this book for me called Fascinate by a woman named Sally Hogshead, I believe. And so I start reading this book, in the very first, I think the first chapter was talking about rooms full of exotic dancers. And the girls that ended up making the most money were the women that were not taking birth control. And that was just a fascinating thought. And so I remember calling Michelle. I was like, Michelle, have you read this book? Do you realize what I've just learned in this book that you've given me? I've just learned that the most successful exotic dancers do not take birth control. And she's completely embarrassed.
Well, but
it was fascinating.
That brings us back to where we started with this conversation. It brings actually back to my work. I mean, not to burst the bubble on exotic dancing, but that we are most influenced by parts of our environment that we are unaware of. And this then proposes, well, oh my God, well, what does that mean? And it's like, well, first of all, people think of CNBC maybe as part of the environment, or Barron's, or their broker calling, or something or other, or, that there are all these environments that are influencing you, the listener here, in ways that you don't realize. And the people that I've met, the people that became market wizards, are people who at some point began to realize that was going on and began to manage it. He's not a trader, but he's a good example. A lot of people don't realize that, or don't remember that Warren Buffett went to Columbia University in New York City, and he worked for Benjamin Graham in New York City. So he was there and he left because he found it was distracting in terms of what he really wanted to do. And I'd leave your listeners with that idea is sometimes it's not taking on more that makes a difference. It's being able to let go of something that, oh, it's New York, hey, it's a wonderful town. And if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere and all that. And he went, no, it's too distracting for what I want to do. I've figured out what I want to do, and here's how I need to rearrange my life. That's a leverage point, by the way. That's a higher level trading strategy, is you begin to organize your inputs because you realize that you will be distracted by things you're not even aware of if you don't take charge of them.
Charles, I'm going to let you end it there because that was mighty eloquent, and I've had you on the horn here for over an hour, and I know you've got stuff to work on and stuff to make happen. But listen, I appreciate your time today, and we're definitely going to have you back on at least a couple times before the book comes out, because I'm sure people are going to definitely dive in, and so we will definitely do something here again this summer. I'm off to Beijing on Monday.
Wow.
So I will be in the motherland, the home base.
Take some oxygen with you.
I've got my masks, actually. I bought some masks here in Vietnam. So I don't know what kind of air I'm going to be breathing in Beijing, and I don't know if I'm going to have internet access or anything. So I've actually been praying on this trip. Not praying, but I've been kind of secretly hoping to end up in a jail somewhere just for a night, just to kind of experience it, But I haven't decided to really do anything yet that would require some of these fine forces to throw me in. But actually, I guess I did violate one rule in this hotel, but we're not going to talk about that on this podcast. But anyways, I should probably be quiet and go and let you go.
Michael, a pleasure as usual. Thank you. You bring good stuff out.
Thanks, Charles. Take care.
You too.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.